Ah yes, the People Mover, the ride that literally every Disney fan and their grandma wants to see come back to Disneyland. And you know, I totally get it. Even though I've only seen the ride through videos on YouTube and POVs, there's just something so iconic about the People Mover. I don't know about you, but I always loved the way how the ride moved around the land. It brought so much life and energy to Tomorrowland at a level that not many other theme park lands around the world can ever come close to achieving. Recently, there's been a lot of talk within the community about how the People Mover might actually be coming back to Disneyland. Now, there are people who think that it will come back, definitely, and at the same time, there are also a lot of people who think that it will not come back. And with D23 right around the corner, there's been rumors, speculation, and even a rather suspicious tweet from a Disneyland Resort Imagineer. So with that being said, is it really possible to bring Disneyland's People Mover back from the dead? Honestly, yeah, it kinda is. When I first started making this video, I was convinced that the People Mover would never come back to Disneyland within a million years. Looking at it realistically, I thought there were problems with regulation, safety, operations, and a bunch of other things that I do not have time to get into. But the more and more I researched about the ride, the more and more I started to find evidence that bringing back the People Mover is a lot more simple than many of us can imagine. However, before I get deeper into the video, I just want to let you guys know that there are two other YouTubers out there, Dallin from Offhand Disney, as well as Dave from Fresh Baked Disney, who did great videos on the People Mover. And if you haven't watched them yet, I really think you should go out and go check them out. Of course, after watching this video. Now, among the Disney community, there are a lot of people who believe that one of the biggest hurdles for bringing back the People Mover is the ADA compliancy. ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, was a law put into place in the 1990s, and its main goal is to protect disabled individuals from discrimination. For theme parks, they basically require newly built or remodeled rides and attractions to accommodate people with disabilities, primarily those with wheelchairs and scooters. I and many others were under this impression that these steep slopes of the People Mover tracks were not ADA compliant. This is because during evacuations, you don't want to see little cute Jessie in her cute little pink wheelchair ragdolling down the tracks at 30 miles an hour. Now, I was convinced that the steep slopes was a humongous issue for Disney. The People Mover tracks constantly go up and down very steep slopes, especially parts around the Launch Bay building and above Autopia. However, instead of just telling you guys that it was impossible and it couldn't be done, I did a little bit of research. And by research, I mean I went through a majority of the 2019 California Access Compliancy Advisory Reference Manual and also spoke directly to an official government ADA specialist just to find out I was completely wrong. The weird thing about ADA compliancy is that when it comes to theme parks, it applies in every public area except evacuation routes. While guests can use evacuation routes, it's not something that guests can just use whenever they want. You can't just stand up during a ride at Thunder Mountain and take a stroll on the evac path, unless of course you're this guy. Like, damn, absolute Chad. For theme park attractions, ADA only applies to walkways, queues, loading and unloading areas. These areas, by law, must contain a minimum path width of 3 feet, a maximum ramp slope of 8.5% with exceptions up to 12.5% in certain situations, and in the worst case scenario, a lift to allow access to those who can't use stairs. Newly built or majorly modified attractions are required to follow these rules. Again, none of which apply to the actual track of the attraction itself. Okay, so that's great. The People Mover track is ADA compliant, but what about the queue and loading area? Those areas are from, the 1960s, so there's no way they can be ADA compliant, right? Well, remember how I said how ADA was put into law in 1990? Well, it just so happens that the Rocket Rods, an attraction that replaced the People Mover, opened in 1995. And since the Rocket Rods were constructed after ADA was put into place in 1990, it would have been required by law to follow these regulations, or else Disney would not have been able to open the ride. In other words, the reason why the People Mover today is ADA compliant is because of the fact the rocket rods replaced them in 1995. Technically, that would also mean that Disneyland's PeopleMover system, the ride that's been literally abandoned for the last 30 years, is more ADA compliant than the currently operating PeopleMover system over in Walt Disney World. Another thing I hear a lot from people is how the rocket rod vehicles destroyed the PeopleMover track. If you ask almost anyone in the Disney community why the PeopleMover isn't coming back, one of their first responses might be, oh, it's just because the rocket rods went too fast around the corners and just damaged the track. Now, I'm no structural engineer by any means, but there are a few things that I feel like people kind of look over in this scenario, like how the rocket rod vehicles never directly touched the PeopleMover track. When the Imagineers designed the rocket rods, they knew it was going to be a fast-paced attraction, and therefore, they knew it needed a new set of tracks. So what the Imagineers ended up doing was adding a central rail for main power and supporting the main weight of the ride vehicles, and also adding two small little platforms on the side of the rails for the big wheels that drive the vehicle forward. Again, no direct contact with the PeopleMover track. As for turns, if you watch a rocket rod's POV, what you might see is that the vehicles massively decrease speed around corners. You know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that a ride vehicle that 1. Never directly touched the PeopleMover track, and 2. Massively slowed down around corners would be the main cause behind the destruction of the PeopleMover. If that wasn't a mind banger enough for you, let me hit you with this. OSHA. Does it really make sense when an organization like OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, who happens to hand out workplace violations like free candy, looks at the decrepit state of the PeopleMover tracks and say, "What? You want us to give you the okay to have a major walkway under a track that's been structurally damaged over the course of 3 years?" Yeah, sure, why not? I don't see anything wrong with that. Wait, what? Now you want your workers to endanger themselves to install heavy-duty signage as well as multiple lighting fixtures on a structurally damaged platform that also happens to hang over a major walkway? Sure, I don't see anything wrong with that. Oh, Now you want live actors with limited visibility to perform on a damaged platform which is also supporting extremely heavy equipment and happens to be hanging over hundreds of people's heads? Of course, what could go wrong? You know, it just doesn't make sense to me that an organization like OSHA would let that slide. If anything, I think most of the damage the PeopleMover track has accrued over the years is cosmetic. Which now brings me to my third point. Let's talk about removing the track. Right now, there's a lot of talk in the Disney community about how the launch bay building, as well as the track that goes on top of the Autopia attraction, will be removed when Disney brings back the PeopleMover. Now, this is a little more subjective since there's not a whole lot of information on regulation and law can go off of here, but in general, I partially agree with what people are saying. I do think Disney is going to remove parts of the track that go over Autopia. However, I don't believe Disney is going to remove the tracks around Launch Bay. Let's start with the section over Autopia first. Over the last few years, Disney has heavily reduced the amount of maintenance performed throughout the park, with rides and attractions being hit the hardest. Maintenance and rides like Indiana Jones Adventure have gotten so bad over the years that even the general public, aka non-Disney fans, have started to notice. But still, at least it's not as bad as Shanghai Disneyland. As for the PeopleMover, maintenance, not surprisingly, has always been an issue. Having more than 50 ride vehicles out on the track at one time, constantly going up and down steep slopes, while all being powered by dozens upon dozens of individual spinning tires on a track which also happens to go through an area where fallen leaves and branches can potentially get jammed into the motors, can lead to some problems. On top of that, if there really was any damage done by the rocket rod vehicles, it would have definitely been in this area. When the rocket rod vehicles were in the middle of Tomorrowland, where Space Mountain, Star Tours, and Buzz Lightyear are currently, they never really took turns fast, slowing down well before a curve. However, when the vehicles got to the Autopia area, they basically gunned it down the track regardless if there was a turn or not, 100% putting extra stress on the track. Would this have damaged the structural integrity of the track? Hard to say, I don't know. But if what people say is true, this area would definitely be the culprit. Combine all of that with the fact that there really isn't a way for Disney to stuff IP into this area, it kinda makes sense for Disney to remove this part of the PeopleMover track. Less track means less moving parts, less vehicles, and less tree trimming, which overall leads to a lower operational cost for the park. or in other words, more ching for Disney. If you don't believe me, just recently Disney removed a big chunk of plant life along the abandoned Nature's Wonderland track on Rivers of America and replaced them with less water-hungry plants to, save money. I wouldn't be surprised if they took similar actions for the PeopleMover tracks just to save a few bucks. As for the section around Launch Bay, I don't exactly agree with what most people are saying. A lot of people point out that the current Launch Bay building is abandoned and is also suffering from a mold problem, which, to their credit, are both true. They also point out that there was a clip in the Imagineering story of Joe Rohde, who at the time was in charge of Disneyland's new Tomorrowland renovation, removing the Launch Bay building from Tomorrowland, which, as you can see, is also true. With that information, a lot of people make the assumption that Disney is going to remove the Launch Bay building and bring back the PeopleMover in its place. However, I don't think that's the case anymore. Here's the thing. Before Disneyland closed for the pandemic, there was a group of experienced Imagineers, Joe Rohde included, working on Disneyland's new Tomorrowland. However, when the park closed and later reopened a little more than a year later, rumor has it Disney replaced this group of Imagineers with less experienced people with the primary goal of downscaling and budget cutting the original plans. Now, if that information is true, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for Disney to remove the Launch Bay building. You see, nearly every Disney ride on property needs a storage and maintenance facility. These are backstage areas used to store ride vehicles for when the park closes and are also used for basic maintenance. For the PeopleMover and Rocket Rod vehicles, believe it or not, their storage and maintenance facility is literally a part of the Launch Bay building. If you watch a POV of either the PeopleMover or the Rocket Rods, you can actually see the track that leads into and also out of the facility. Removing the Launch Bay building would also mean removing the tracks and maintenance facility for the PeopleMover. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Disney to remove the maintenance building just to build another one in its place. Like, there's not many other places in Disneyland's Tomorrowland where Disney can build a giant maintenance area outside of either the Utopia area, which I don't think they can remove, or where the current facility currently sits today. Plus, why would you build another maintenance facility when there's already a fully built out maintenance and storage facility on property which also happens to be conveniently connected to the track? It just, again, doesn't make sense. To destroy a maintenance facility just to rebuild it again in the same area doesn't make sense, especially for modern day Disney, who, as you probably may know, loves to nickel and dime everything in the parks. But at the end of the day, all that really means is that bringing back the PeopleMover for Disney is possibly an even easier task than we might have thought. So let's recap. The track and loading area for the Disneyland PeopleMover is already ADA compliant because of the Rocket Rods. Okay, so ADA is no longer an issue. Secondly, the Rocket Rod vehicles never actually made contact with the PeopleMover tracks and slowed down massively around a majority of the curbs. This potentially could mean that a majority of the current PeopleMover track can in fact still be reused. Lastly, the maintenance facilities used to service the Rocket Rod vehicles and previously the PeopleMover vehicles is still in place behind the Launch Bay building. Again, a cheaper alternative and a bigger incentive for Disney to revive the PeopleMover attraction. So will the PeopleMover really come back to Disneyland? Honestly, that's a hard question to answer. At the end of the day, it really all comes down to the executives of Disney and if bringing back the ride would be a profitable endeavor for the company to pursue. However, for me, after doing all this research, of course, it really is surprising to see how mistaken the Disney community was, me included. Things that I thought were completely impossible or way out of Disney's budget and scope have realistically been there all along. So to end off this already super long video, do I personally think Disney will bring back the PeopleMover? After examining all the evidence and literally a week of research, yeah, I really do think Disney is going to bring back the ride. That's why this year I'm keeping a really close eye on D23, which also happens to be streaming on YouTube. So there's really no reason you shouldn't be there either. On that note, thank you very much for watching the video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe, share the video with your friends, get the word out there. I mean, if you don't really care, I guess you don't really care. But the main thing is, hopefully the next time I see you, or next time you hear from me, it will be on the PeopleMover. All right, see you later.